Ever left a family gathering early just to protect your peace?
You make everyone uncomfortable. That was the exact sentence. No warning, no warm-up, no attempt to sugarcoat it with some passive-aggressive fluff. Just a flat, ice-cold delivery from my brother, like he was giving me some necessary truth for my own good. He said it while sitting in his truck, I assume, because I could hear the turn signal clicking in the background and that muffled static from his cheap Bluetooth earpiece. I just stood there in my kitchen, barefoot, holding my coffee, staring out the window at the neighbor's dog pissing on my hydrangeas, and I remember blinking 3 times, like my brain couldn't quite sync the words with the person I was hearing them from. It wasn't that I didn't believe him. It was that I did. And that made it worse. He went on, like he'd rehearsed it. Said it was Mom's idea at first, then pivoted, claiming Lisa brought it up, and finally admitted, in that half-assed soldier tone he gets when he's trying to be assertive, that it was a family decision. I laughed, just a soft little breath through my nose, not because it was funny, but because the absurdity of it settled over me like wet concrete. You make everyone uncomfortable. That's why I wasn't invited for the holidays this year. Not because I did something. Not because I said something awful or ruined a birthday or brought up politics at dinner. Just because I made them uncomfortable. Like I was some living, breathing bad vibe. I didn't say much. Not then. I just told him, okay, and hung up. He didn't fight me on it. Didn't try to soften the blow or take it back. That was the part that stuck with me the most. There was no regret in his voice. No hesitation. Like he'd been waiting to say it. Like this whole thing had been cooking for a while, and now he finally got the green light to cut me off and could pretend it was some collective choice. I stood there a minute longer, then went to my office, logged into my laptop, and opened 3 tabs. I started with the joint account I'd created to help Ethan with his business expenses. Years ago, when his construction company was barely crawling, I gave him $5,000 to get off the ground. Then another 10 when the truck broke down. Then another 15 when he wanted to expand. He never paid me back. Not once. And I never asked. I thought I was helping my brother build something. Thought I was part of the team. Turns out, I was just a silent investor in a life that didn't want me in it. So I drained the account to 0 and closed it. Next was the backup credit card I'd given Mom for emergencies, though somehow it always ended up used at Macy's during Black Friday or to buy Amazon packages full of who knows what. I turned off the card, called the bank, revoked her user status, and set a fraud alert just in case she tried to dispute it. Then I went into the trust account I'd set up for Ethan's oldest kid college fund, started when she was 3. She's 12 now, and I've put in 10 grand a year without a word. I didn't touch the money. I'm not cruel. But I removed my name and canceled any future contributions. Let Lisa figure it out. She's always talking about how we're finally stable now. Let's see how stable they are when that stability isn't quietly funneled from my bank account. I didn't cry. Not once. Not even a lump in the throat. Just a strange, quiet calm, like finally seeing the mold behind a wall you always suspected was rotting. You don't scream. You just start planning demolition. And maybe that's what made this whole thing feel less like heartbreak and more like inventory. I wasn't losing my family. I was realizing I never really had them, not in the way I thought. I was their backup plan, their safety net, their plan B. The person they tolerated at holidays because I picked up the check and played the role. I thought about last year's Christmas. I flew in, bought gifts for everyone, stayed at a hotel because there wasn't enough room at the house even though Lisa's sister and her 3 kids somehow had space. I cooked dinner because Mom was too tired, wrapped presents because Lisa had a migraine, and fixed Ethan's damn internet router in the middle of the night because he said his son needed it for school. I even drove them to the airport 2 days later because their car battery died. They didn't even offer gas money. I chalked it up to family being family. Now I see it for what it was, convenience. So yeah, I pulled the plug. On all of it. I didn't announce it. Didn't send some dramatic message or air out receipts. I just started flipping switches off, one by one, like a utility company cutting power to a house that hasn't paid its bill in a year. The part that still gets me, still crawls under my skin, is that none of them, not a single one, thought to ask how I was doing. Not when I got divorced. Not when I had to bury Dad. Not even when I got passed over for a promotion after 2 years of breaking my back. They sent me some thumbs up emojis on Facebook and maybe a hang in there card, but never a call, never a visit. But God forbid I miss a baby shower or forget a birthday. Then suddenly I was selfish and pulling away from the family. But this wasn't pulling away. This was stepping out of a room I was never really allowed into. And I knew it wouldn't be long before the silence from me started echoing louder than my presence ever did. Because when the lights go out, people don't miss the wires, they miss the warmth. They miss the comfort they never paid for. And that's what I took back. The comfort. The cushion. The unacknowledged, invisible support that made their life easier. 2 days later, Lisa sent me a mass text about chipping in for a surprise gift for Mom. I didn't respond. That's when Ethan posted something on Facebook, some vague, self-righteous rant about toxic people and cutting out negativity. A few people commented. One even liked it. And I realized this wasn't about me being uncomfortable. It was about me not being easy to control anymore. And that's when I knew. This wasn't going to end with a text thread or a quiet holiday season. This was just the beginning. There's a strange kind of power in silence, not the peaceful, meditative kind people find in yoga studios or on hiking trails, but the kind that hangs in a room like thick smoke after a fire, suffocating, inescapable, and absolutely loaded with tension. That's the kind of silence I chose after Ethan made his little announcement. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself or ask questions. I didn't send dramatic texts to Mom or try to get Lisa on the phone for some behind-the-scenes damage control. I didn't explain myself at all. Because deep down, I realized that for years, I had been funding a family fantasy, one where I was accepted, appreciated, needed, and the moment I pulled my money out of the equation, the illusion crumbled faster than I ever expected. But I didn't go in swinging. That's not my style. Instead, I treated the whole thing like a slow audit. I took inventory of everything I had quietly done for them, every account, every favor, every sacrifice, and one by one, I began flipping the switches, not out of vengeance or spite, but out of a growing, cold realization that I had allowed myself to be used under the soft glow of a word they liked to throw around a lot: family. And it wasn't until that word lost all its meaning that I realized just how many strings I had been holding all this time, and how damn heavy they'd become. It started with the house. Not mine, Ethan and Lisa's. They live in a nice enough suburb, nothing flashy, but enough to impress their friends at the barbecue and post filtered sunset photos from the back deck. That house was bought with a loan I co-signed after Ethan's credit tanked following 2 missed car payments and a bad business lease. I remember the night he called me, voice shaky, trying to play it cool, but clearly desperate, explaining how the bank wouldn't approve them a loan and how they'd already put down a non-refundable deposit on the lot. Lisa was pregnant at the time. Mom cried on the phone, saying how much it would mean for the baby to grow up in a real home. So I did what I always do. I stepped in, signed the papers, and told them not to worry. I was reassured, more than once, that they'd handle the monthly payments on their own. I didn't even ask for equity. I didn't want to be that person, the one who turns a family favor into a transaction. I just wanted them to be okay. Fast forward 6 years, and I've been covering the difference on that mortgage for almost 2. At first, it was small, just a couple hundred here and there, chalked up to a slow month or an unexpected bill. Then Lisa lost a side gig, Ethan's truck needed new tires, and somehow my name ended up back on their emergency contact list at the bank. I kept paying because it was easier than listening to the panic. But after the call, that now infamous, "you make everyone uncomfortable" line, I went straight to the bank, revoked the autopay, and asked them to send future communications directly to Ethan. I didn't call to warn him. I didn't send a follow-up email or leave a note. I simply took my name out of the story they'd been writing without me. Then there was the business. Ethan's construction company wasn't failing exactly, but it wasn't thriving either. He's a decent contractor, I'll give him that, but logistics, finances, taxes, that's never been his strong suit. And Lisa, for all her Pinterest board aesthetics and corporate talk, was more interested in photo ops than balance sheets. So when they came to me for help, after a particularly expensive accident involving an uninsured subcontractor and a botched home remodel, I stepped in. I paid the legal fees. I rewrote their budget. I even helped set up a payroll system. For a while, they called me their silent partner, which is funny now, because I was the only one doing any of the heavy lifting. I logged into that system next and disconnected my credentials. Canceled my account and access. Deleted the backup cloud where I stored copies of their contracts and invoices. I gave no warning. Just vanished from their operations like a ghost they never believed in until the lights went out. And then there was Mom. With Mom, the strings weren't financial so much as emotional, though I suppose there were plenty of dollars wrapped up in those threads too. I paid for her hip replacement. I covered the plumbing disaster last winter when her basement flooded and the insurance claimed it was her fault for neglecting maintenance. I flew her to a resort in Arizona when she said she wanted to reconnect with nature and feel like a woman again. But it wasn't about the money. It was about the fact that, for years, I let her guilt me into believing that support was love, and that by giving and giving and giving, I was proving I was still part of this messy tribe, even if I never quite fit. And still, she stood by Ethan's decision. She didn't call me after that conversation. Didn't ask how I felt about being uninvited. Didn't even pretend to be torn. Instead, she sent me one of her classic, high-emotion, low-accountability texts. I hope you understand, Renee. Holidays are a delicate time. We just want peace. No mention of how much I'd given. No acknowledgement of the fact that my presence had bought peace for years. So I went into her Amazon account, the one I used to restock her household essentials every other month, and turned off subscribe and save. I canceled her Instacart membership. I even deleted the shared Netflix account she used under the profile named Nana. I don't know why that one felt so satisfying, but it did. I sat at my desk for a long time after that, not doing anything, just staring at the screensaver flashing across my second monitor. It was a picture of a lake I visited once, years ago, when I took a solo trip to Montana to get away from everything. I remember feeling so alone on that trip, not in a bad way, but in a way that made me realize how little noise there is in the world when nobody's expecting you to answer for their mess. That's what this felt like. Not revenge. Not cruelty. Just quiet. Because the truth is, I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped holding it all up. And part of me wondered, as I shut down my laptop and turned off the lights, how long it would take for them to realize just how much weight I'd been carrying all this time. The answer came quicker than I expected. And it started, as most family drama does these days, with a cryptic social media post and a poorly hidden plea for sympathy. But that's a story for another night. It started with a photo, nothing dramatic, nothing obviously accusatory, just a filtered shot of Ethan's work truck, or what was left of it, parked in their driveway with a bright orange sticker slapped diagonally across the windshield. The kind you can spot from a block away, bold letters screaming repossession notice, like a scarlet letter pasted for all the neighborhood to see. Lisa had posted it to her Instagram story without context, just the caption, "When it rains, it pours," layered over a lo-fi acoustic playlist and a half-hearted prayer emoji in the corner. As though turning their public embarrassment into a vague cry for attention might soften the edges of accountability or paint them as victims of some cruel cosmic joke. But I knew better. I recognized the sticker because I'd seen it before years ago, when I helped Ethan clean up the mess of his first business loan default. Back then, he called me from a gas station 2 towns over, out of breath and angry, swearing he'd been blindsided, claiming he had just mailed the check. And like a fool, I believed him. But now there were no phone calls, no half-lies or shaky explanations. Just silence. Not the mutual, grieving kind, but the sharp-edged, resentful kind, the kind that bubbles up when people are too proud to say they're wrong but too desperate not to feel abandoned. The truck wasn't the first to go. A week before that post, I'd gotten a string of automated emails from the online bookkeeping platform I'd set up for Ethan's company, each one colder than the last. Payment declined, card on file expired, your premium subscription has been canceled. I knew what they meant because I'd been the one quietly covering those fees every month, making sure their vendor invoices were auto-processed and their taxes pre-logged. Without it, they were left with a shoebox of receipts and a spreadsheet Lisa barely knew how to open, let alone interpret. Then came the contractor calls. One by one, a few of Ethan's clients somehow found their way to me, through old emails I'd once used to coordinate permits and schedules on his behalf. Most were polite, confused, asking if I was still involved, wondering why their decks were half-finished or their remodels had stalled mid-demo. I told them, as simply as I could, that I was no longer affiliated with Ethan's company. No apology. No cover story. Just the truth, served cold and clean. And that's when the text started, not from Ethan, of course, but from Lisa, who had always been better at playing diplomat, always knew how to feign innocence with just the right mix of sweetness and helplessness. Her first message came late on a Thursday night. "Hey Renee. Just checking in, hope you're doing well. Quick question about the business account. I think we're locked out? Any chance you can reset the password? No greeting. No reference to the holiday exile. No acknowledgement of the invisible wall they'd erected and justified just weeks earlier. Just a soft nudge, like a child reaching back for the hand they swatted away." I stared at her message for a long time, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wasn't sure silence would be enough this time. Still, I chose it. I closed the app, turned my phone screen down, and let the tension marinate. A few days later, another message came, this one tinged with more urgency. "Sorry to bug you again. The tax stuff is a mess, and Ethan can't get into the files you set up. We're kind of in a panic over here." I almost smiled, not because I took pleasure in their panic, but because I remembered the night I'd spent organizing that very system, while they went out for margaritas to decompress from what they called a stressful week. I had worked until 2 in the morning, formatting their QuickBooks and syncing every expense to categories they didn't even know existed. And now, with it gone, they were finally seeing what I'd been holding together with digital duct tape and grit. Mom entered the scene shortly after. Her message was predictable in tone, carefully phrased to sound concerned without taking sides, the kind of emotional triangulation she'd mastered over decades of playing mediator in conflicts she helped create. "Honey, I don't know what's going on between you and your brother, but things are getting bad. They're saying the company might fold. The kids are scared. Is there anything you can do to help for their sake?" Not a word about the holidays. Not a word about being excluded. Not even a half-hearted apology. Just the assumption that I would, once again, step in and fix what they'd so casually broken. And that's when I remembered something Ethan once said years ago, maybe at Dad's funeral or maybe during one of those rare nights when we actually talked without fighting. He said, "You always want to be the hero, Renee, but nobody asked you to be." It stung at the time, not because it wasn't true, but because it was the closest thing to honesty he'd ever offered me. And maybe that's why this time, I let them drown. I didn't send money. I didn't reply. I didn't even check in on the kids, though that part hurt the most. But I told myself they'd survive. Kids always do. And maybe, in some twisted way, this would teach them something their parents never could, that consequences aren't cruelty and silence doesn't always mean apathy. One evening, I got home from work and found 3 missed calls from Mom. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I already knew the sound, sniffles barely held back, long pauses, that breathless way she speaks when she wants to seem fragile. I sat down on my couch, poured a glass of wine, and opened my laptop, not to do damage this time, but to review the audit trail I'd started. And as I looked at the digital breadcrumbs of everything I'd ever done for them, every transfer, every login, every late-night fix, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: control. Not power. Not superiority. Just the quiet clarity of someone who had stopped begging to be part of something that never had room for her in the first place. But clarity doesn't last forever. Eventually, people start talking. Eventually, someone decides to twist the story. And it all began, as these things always do, with a screenshot. It didn't begin with a phone call or a letter or a conversation held face-to-face with the kind of trembling restraint that usually defines real family conflict. where people sit too close in too small a room and use their eyes to say the things they're too cowardly to voice aloud. Instead, it started, as most pathetic modern reckonings do, with a screenshot. A screenshot sent to me by a friend from high school I hadn't spoken to in years, someone whose name I barely remembered, yet who somehow remained tethered to the social media sphere of my family's drama-stained orbit, like a satellite stuck in permanent rotation around the same tired, manufactured gravity. The image she sent was a snippet of a group message, most of the names blurred out, but not the words, never the words. In the screenshot, Ethan had written to a few people, friends, maybe, or family, saying she pulled the plug on everything. The business, the house, even the kids' savings. Like we're nothing to her. Honestly, I'm starting to think she never loved this family. She just wanted to control it. That was the line that punched the air out of my lungs, not because it was cruel or even surprising, but because it was so absurdly, gallingly false that for a moment I thought it had to be a joke. But it wasn't. It was real. He had written that. My brother, the same man who once wept on my couch after Dad died, the same man who asked me, voice barely steady, to walk his daughter down the aisle if he ever didn't make it home from deployment, had rewritten the entire story of our relationship into something grotesque and convenient, like a child smearing paint over the walls of a house and calling it renovation. I stared at the screenshot longer than I should have, fingers curled so tightly around the phone I thought I might snap it in half, and then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the family group chat. That cursed little digital room where our lives had been reduced to emojis, poorly framed photos, passive-aggressive reminders about birthdays, and vague attempts at forced intimacy. I scrolled back through the history, months and months of texts, most of them mine, sent with cheerful exclamation points and dumb jokes, updates from business trips, reminders about doctor appointments for Mom, even links to recipes Ethan never thanked me for. So much effort. So many threads. And in all of it, not once, did anyone ever say, "How are you, Renee?" Not once did someone check in unless it was to ask for something. And now here they were, telling each other that I had never loved them. I didn't rage. I didn't call or scream or throw my phone. What I did was colder than all of that. I began collecting screenshots, emails, bank statements, photos. I gathered every tangible piece of evidence that proved I had been there for them, every Venmo payment, every emailed itinerary from flights I booked to help them move, every invoice I paid on their behalf, every password I reset for Mom when she forgot how to log into her damn pharmacy app. I compiled it all, not to weaponize it, not to unleash some calculated PR campaign, but because I needed to see it with my own eyes, laid out in the harsh light of truth, so I wouldn't ever again question what I already knew. I had done everything I could for people who never once thought I deserved a seat at the table unless I was paying for the food. It took 3 hours. 3 hours of assembling a digital dossier of generosity. When it was done, I sat back, looked at it all, and finally allowed myself to feel the weight not of guilt, but of finality. And then, with one deep breath, I wrote a single message in the family group chat. One line, direct and sharp, like a scalpel cutting through the years of buildup. You said I make everyone uncomfortable. Good. Stay uncomfortable. Then I attached 5 screenshots. Nothing dramatic. Just cold, factual proof, dates, payments, account authorizations, the receipts they never expected me to keep. I didn't include commentary. I didn't say, "Look what I did for you." I let the evidence speak, and speak it did. Within 20 minutes, the silence exploded. Lisa was the first to respond. Of course she was, her message uploaded. Saccharine apology tinged with plausible deniability. "Renee, I'm so sorry if you felt unappreciated. That was never our intention. We're just under a lot of stress right now and maybe things got twisted. Can we talk?" As if "you make everyone uncomfortable" was just a miscommunication. As if I had somehow misheard or misinterpreted a sentence delivered like a clean surgical cut to my identity. Ethan followed a minute later, less polished, more wounded pride than remorse. "I didn't mean for things to go this far. You're twisting my words. We just needed space, and now you've turned it into some vendetta. We're your family. You don't do this to family." I almost laughed. But I didn't. I just waited. Because I knew what was coming next. And sure enough, there it was. Mom's name popped up with a typing indicator that lasted nearly 5 minutes, as if she were writing and rewriting the perfect blend of guilt and affection. Her message arrived in 3 long paragraphs, filled with her usual emotional calculus. Your father would be heartbroken if he saw us like this. You know I'm not good with conflict. I just want my children to get along. Maybe it wasn't fair what Ethan said, but he was hurting and people say things they don't mean. Can't we just move forward and remember what matters? But I remembered Thanksgiving. Not this last one, where I wasn't even invited, but the one 3 years ago when I arrived early, as usual, to help Mom with the cooking, only to find Lisa in the kitchen already, whispering to someone on the phone. Her voice just low enough that I wasn't supposed to hear, except I did. I remember her saying, she's just a little much, you know? Cold. It's like she's always judging us. But we have to be nice. She paid for the turkey. And I remember standing outside the kitchen door, holding a bag of groceries, heart hammering so loud I thought the canned yams might rattle in my hands. I never brought it up. Never mentioned it to anyone. Just stuffed it down, buried it beneath polite smiles and extra servings and gifts that cost more than anyone needed to know. Because that's what I thought love was, swallowing the hurt so no one else had to taste it. But not anymore. So I read Mom's message and instead of replying, I left the group chat. Not quietly. I didn't just delete it and pretend it never existed. I clicked leave chat and let the little notification tell them all I was gone. Let them stare at that system message, sterile and final. Renee has left the conversation. That's all it said. No explanation. No fanfare. But in the silence that followed, I imagined they finally understood something they never had before. When the person holding everything together finally lets go, it doesn't fall apart all at once. It unravels in slow, quiet strands. Until all that's left is the sound of your own guilt echoing back at you from the void they left behind. And they hadn't even seen the worst of it yet. There are certain moments in life when silence no longer feels like power or restraint, but instead becomes a kind of poison, a slow, corrosive thing that seeps into your blood and begins to hollow you out from the inside, not because you regret what you've done, but because you finally begin to grasp just how much you've allowed yourself to be erased in service of other people's comfort, and how easily they continued on without you once you stopped feeding the illusion. That realization hit me sometime between New Year's Eve and the first Monday of January, in the strange, gray emptiness that always comes after the holidays when the lights come down, the decorations get shoved into boxes, and people start pretending they didn't just spend a month pretending everything was fine. I hadn't seen or spoken to anyone in my family since the group chat imploded. No follow-up calls. No tearful voicemails. Not even a late-night apology email sent in that breathless tone of desperation they all mastered when their own decisions caught up to them. It had been total, jarring radio silence, which should have felt like a relief, should have marked the closure I'd earned, but instead, it just echoed louder each day, filling the corners of my house with a kind of stillness that didn't comfort so much as accuse. Not because I missed them. I didn't. What I missed was the version of me who still believed that maybe, just maybe, one day they'd see me for who I was and not just for what I could do for them. But the truth is, they were never going to see that version of me because they never wanted her to exist. They needed me to stay in the role they'd cast me in years ago, the dependable one, the overachiever, the perpetual outsider who made them feel inferior without even trying. And when I finally stopped playing along, they didn't just reject me, they turned me into the villain in a story I had helped write with every dollar I handed over and every bite of bitterness I swallowed in silence. I wasn't going to end it like that. Not quietly. Not on their terms. So I made a decision. One final act. Not revenge, not exactly, but something harder to define, something colder and far more surgical, closure, sharpened into a blade. I packed a bag, booked a flight, and showed up unannounced on New Year's Eve in the town I used to fly into twice a year like a visiting diplomat, always arriving with gifts and leaving with bruises no one could see. I didn't call ahead. I didn't text. I didn't ask permission. Their house looked smaller than I remembered, and not just in the way childhood homes shrink when you return to them as an adult, but in a way that spoke to something more profound, like the foundation itself had begun to crumble under the weight of its own pretense. The lawn was patchy, the paint chipped near the garage, and the porch light flickered like it wasn't sure whether to welcome me or warn me away. I stood there for a moment, keys clenched in one hand, breath fogging in the cold air, and then I knocked. Lisa opened the door. For a split second, her face froze, that practiced suburban smile slipping before she caught it and tried to recover, but by then it was too late. Her eyes had already betrayed her. She hadn't expected to see me. She hadn't wanted to. Behind her, I heard Ethan's voice, low and muttering, followed by Mom's softer tone, the one she used when she thought someone was about to faint or cry. I didn't give Lisa a chance to say anything. I stepped inside, brushed past her, and walked into the living room like I still had a place there. Ethan was sitting on the couch, looking smaller than I remembered, slouched in a worn sweatshirt with a tear near the collar and eyes that looked like he hadn't slept in days. Mom was perched on the armrest beside him, clutching a tissue she hadn't even used yet, just holding it like a prop, ready to cry at a moment's notice. They all stared at me like I was a ghost, and maybe I was, maybe the version of me they'd buried beneath obligation had finally returned to haunt them. I didn't sit down. I didn't ask how they were doing or why things had fallen so far so fast. I pulled out a small envelope from my coat pocket and placed it on the coffee table, then stood back and waited. No one moved. Finally, Ethan leaned forward and opened it. Inside was a check, made out to each of them for $1. Nothing more, nothing less. He stared at it, then looked up at me, confusion and anger and disbelief all swirling together in a look I'd seen before, the one he wore when confronted with consequences he couldn't argue his way out of. I met his eyes, calm and unblinking, and said, "That's the last thing I'll ever give you. Call it closure. Call it balance. Call it whatever the hell you need to sleep at night." Lisa tried to speak then, tried to interrupt with some attempt at peacekeeping, but I held up a hand and silenced her with a glance. "Don't," I said. "You had a choice. You all did. You chose to cut me out, and now you get to live without what came with me." Mom sniffled, crumpling the tissue in her hand even though her eyes were still dry. "Renee, sweetheart, this isn't you. This bitterness, this isn't who you are." I turned to her slowly, measuredly, and replied, "No, Mom. This is who I am. You just never wanted to know her. You were fine with the version of me that paid for everything and smiled through the insults. But this version? The one who demands respect? That's the one who makes you uncomfortable." No one said anything after that. I walked to the door, paused only once before I left, and turned to Lisa, not Ethan, not Mom, but her, the quiet architect of so much of the passive cruelty I had endured, and I said, in a voice that was soft, but heavy with finality, "Tell your kids the truth someday. Not the sanitized version where Aunt Renee walked away out of spite. Tell them the truth, that I kept the lights on while you treated me like an intruder. That I stayed long after I should have left. And that in the end, I didn't abandon this family. I just stopped pretending it existed. Then I left. I didn't look back." The flight home was quiet. The sky was dark. Somewhere over Ohio, I stared out the window and thought about the girl I used to be, the one who used to send holiday cards and birthday gifts and texts that always went unanswered. I didn't miss her. Not anymore. Because there are things worse than being alone. Like being surrounded by people who only love what you give them, never who you are. And as I touched down and stepped into the cold night air, I felt something lift, a weight I had carried for so long that I didn't even notice how it had curved my spine. I stood up straighter. I breathed deeper. I wasn't healed. I wasn't whole. But for the first time in years, I was finally free. And that would be enough.